Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to embark today on a 4-episode journey that ends up with this piece of carved wood. Today, we're just going to make the wood, and this wood, actually, we can do, I put it on the main graph. This wood, we are going to be able to change the style of the rings. So we can, we can move around. You can't really see it with the carving, but you get different styles of rings. And this is a standalone material, as are the other two basic things that are used to make this up. So while we're using it with the wood in this case, you can actually switch this out to a metal and it's going to work just as well. The next video after we do this one will be these chisel marks. These I haven't put into the main graph, but we can change the way that the chisels, the way the chisel marks work. And these are noises that we made, that are standalone. So again, we can use it with this wood or with another wood, and we can also change the style of the chisel tool that is used. So the video after today's video is going to be more about making custom noises that we can then reapply to other materials, and that's for the finer chisels that are happening in here. And then the third standalone material we're going to have is going to be this carving material. Now you'll notice that I have inputs put in here, and that's because this material, well, it's not even a material, it's an engine that takes whatever input you put in here, and then it's going to manipulate it according to the functions of that engine. So again, it's something that can be reused with other things, and this one I did expose in the main graph, so we can fool around with it here. We have the size of whatever those inputs are can be manipulated within, I've got 2 of them in bands and 2 of them out of bands. We can also move their X location and move their Y location. And this can be done for all of them. Now, this little engine here doesn't deal with the color. That's what we're going to do in the 4th video. We're going to do all of this stuff out in here. And we're going to add in a variable that's going to let us change the color of each one of those individual bands. So it is kind of an epic material, which is why we're going to divide it up into 4 separate videos. But they're standalone, so you can go ahead and use what you've learned in one video in other things while you're waiting for the next episode in the Epic Wood Carving series. Right, so without further ado, let's get to making our wood material here. Right, so File, New Substance. We'll call this carved, no, let's call this wood. And it's a PBR template. We'll click OK. We are going to not be using a metallic. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch this. I'm going to turn it into an AO. Right. So we are going to first make the basic wood rings, and I've done this before. We're going to get a tile generator, and we're going to assign, well, let's just start with a paraboloid to get this squared away, and then we're going to set it up so that it looks more like we need it to look like. Let's start with 2. I forget. I didn't mark that down in my notes. I think it's either going to be 2 or 3. It's going to be a low number. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it's what you want it to look like. But we're now going to be making the basic form of our rings. So this is talking about the space in between them, the interstices. And that's obviously the randomization of the various shapes. I'm just copying what's in my notes right now. And then I want them to run all the way across. So I came up with 2.5. No, it's 2.25. Let's not use the paraboloid. That's too much. That's probably better. Okay. So that, for instance, this would make a nice ring system. I do want the scale random to a certain degree, so I had that set in. I put the offset in a little bit, and this offsets them according to each other. So you'll notice that, you know, the edges are here, and I'm moving that so they're not one on top of the other. And I'm basically doing it so there's some variety. And then finally, we're going to put some randomization in the X positions here. So this is the basic shape that I end up with if I think we're using a bell right now. Not all of these shapes are appropriate for making wood grains. And that's what we're going to deal with when we're actually making the drop-down list that's going to do these. We're going to go through them and decide which ones we want. But bell is a good one. So we'll start with that and use that as the base for just making up the material with the gradient map before we start actually messing around with the input parameters. All right, so we'll get that gradient map. And now what we're trying to do, we'll turn it into a grayscale also, is we want to start creating rings. And we do that, it's going to copy that black, and I'll start putting it through points. Well, actually, I don't need to paste it there. I can just, and then I'll do the same thing with the white one. Okay. Looks actually pretty good right out of the gate, but let's make it a little bit less even. Now, obviously, the closer you bring these things together, the sharper that line becomes. I think that's good enough for the purposes of this lesson. You can get as fine-tuned with it as you like. And in fact, we may go back and do that, but let's put in the next step first. And right now, this is looking very, very even. So we want to make it less even. And I'm going to get a Gaussian noise and a warp node. Let's make those much bigger before we do anything else. And you know, it's taken this basic, very even shape, and it starts to change it in a way that's looking more natural. So it looks pretty good. Again, we can always go back and adjust these. In fact, we may have to, because as we scroll through these, it's going to affect everything down line. And at this point, before we go on to anything else, I want to address the actual changing shapes of our rings here. If we go into this tile generator now, we can get a pretty good idea of what our rings are going to look like as we scroll through these various options in here. And as we've already seen, some of them make better rings than others. Like, that wouldn't really be something I would want to use. Now, I went through all of these things, and I came up with a list that I like. I made this because it's just going to be easier to talk about it if we look at this before we actually start making our function. This pattern input, if we look at the function for a second, it's an integer, okay? So the result that we have to come up with has to be an integer, and we know that that means that this is a drop-down list. Now, I went and checked. This is a drop-down list that begins with the number 1. They've removed 0. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the 5 position, the bell, is the first one that we're happy with. And that's where we are here. So we have this represents the positions in this drop-down list here, and this is going to represent the numbers that we're going to put into our function. So we're only interested in starting with 5, and that's going to equal our new number 0 once we start making our function. And I've picked out the numbers that I like here. So I like number 5, number 6, number 7, so that corresponds to 5, 6, 7. Then we skip to number 12, 13, 14, and then 16. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We skip here, and then ringed bell is the next one that we use. Ridged bell, which is kind of cool and weird, but it does kind of look like rings. And then we're going to go all the way through. We're not going to use capsule, because that does another thing that I don't like. And then we're going to end up with cone. So that's the logic behind what we're going to do with our function. And essentially what we're doing is we're remapping what they've got here into something that we want. And it's not that complicated. I just wanted to show it to you before we actually started building it. So let's come in here. Let's go back and make an empty function. And then we're going to get into that graph. Oh, you know what we forgot to do? We forgot to make an input parameter. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to call it ring style. And we're going to leave it as a slider. Okay. So let's get our variable. And we'll get our integer ring style. You know what? It helps if you turn it into an integer. I think I left it as a float. I indeed left it as a float. All right. This should work better. Ring style. And then we're going to have to make some comparisons because we don't want all of them, so we have to set up this function. So if it's less than the number 2, and we're going to have to use an integer here because these two have to match. Okay. So if ring style is less than 2, because if we come back to our mapping thing here, 5, 6, 7, 2, because we're talking about our number, we're talking about ring style. So when ring style, which is this column here, reaches the number 2, that's going to be the end of that first group that we want to deal with. So if ring style is less than 2, then we want to add the integer 5 to our result. Because again, let's come back to here. All right, so I start with my 0, so I'm adding 5, and then this turns into 6, and this turns into 7. So I'm adding 5 to my first 2 numbers. My next 2 numbers, while we're in here, let's take a look. My next 2 numbers, I end up having to add 9 to, because I want to map my numbers 3, 4, 5 to the nodes numbers 12, 13, 14. So that is plus 9. So we're going to come back here and make another statement. So if ring style is less than or equal to 5, so 5, 4, or 3, then we want to add integer 9 to it. Otherwise, we're just going to plunk in integer 16 here because the final one, we're only dealing with the one number. And just by default making the last one 16, we're just skipping out this 15 in here. So I hope that wasn't too confusing. But all we really, I mean, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's just, we're just remapping, we're reassigning positions to those integers. No, I already have one. I don't need that. I can just do that. No, not that. This. So let's run that through. Okay, so if ring style is less than 2, I'm going to add 5 to it. Otherwise, if ring style is less than 5, we're going to add 9 or end up with 16. You know, I just realized there's a mistake here. We want to have that as a less than or equal to because we do want to include the number 2. So let's fix that. Okay, let's check it out. So we've got 0, 1, 2. Oh, we still have a problem here. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, there's a mistake right here. I don't want to add 5 to the number 9. I want to add ring style to the number 9. There we go. Didn't have my Wheaties this morning. Let's try it again. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, We do want that one. That's just at the very end. And then 6. Okay. Right. So we're ready to get this to start looking more like a piece of wood now that we've gotten our rings to do what we want them to do. And to make it look more like a piece of wood, what we really want to do is start adding some grainy roughness in here. And for that, I'm going to get an effects map. So we'll make that a grayscale. I'm going to right click, edit effects map. And I'm going to start adding some quadrants. Okay, so I'm pressing spacebar, quadrant. We're also going to want an iterate node, and we'll set that up as our root. Right. So I need to get a noise here. Oh wait, I thought I switched this to grayscale. Okay. So we're going to put our function here on the colored luminosity, and we're going to change the offset, the size, and the rotation. You know, I want kind of like a, you know, I want a wood grain, so it's like very scratchy. We're going to use a paraboloid for our noise, and let's start building. I'm just going to copy what I have out here. Actually, no, we can go through it together. We're going to need a random number between 0 and 1. Actually, we're going to need several of those. Okay, first I'm going to work on my offset. So I want a random x and a random y, and we're going to set our variable. I'm going to type in offset. I'm going to copy it because I'm a lousy typist. And let's finish this up by putting this number 1 in here, because that's the final number that we want in our sequence, because that deals with whether or not this is, you know, visible, because the luminosity in this case, 0, would be completely black. And now we're going to come back to our offset. So pattern offset, empty function, and we're going to get a float 2, and we're going to paste that offset in there and set it as our output node. And now it's offset. But that's not really looking much like wood grain. And that's going to come in the pattern size, which is going to be a little bit more complicated because we're going to have to squish it out in addition to making it random. So I'm going to first start with the proportions, the basic proportions, what I want my relative sizes of the grains to be. So according to my notes, I ended up with the number 4 and the number 0.26. Why not 0.25? I'm not entirely sure, but they're going to be 4 units long and a 1/4 unit wide. And again, we're going to grab up some random nodes. And so this is going to be our x, and this is going to be our y. But I also want to limit their size, because right now it's going to give us some very weird results. Probably easier to do it the other way. Yeah, like that. That helps too. But what's happening here is that I'm getting results that I'm not entirely happy with, because both of these numbers, whether it's along the x or the y, they're getting too short. You know, they're getting outside of the parameters that I want them to be in for the kind of relationship, the height to width relationship. So we're going to have to set some limits on those, and that's where this stuff comes in. So for each one of these, we're going to want to set a floor. And again, I'm going to go from what I had in my notes. For this first one, I don't want it going lower than 0.85. So if this random number between 0 and 4 is less than 0.85, then I want the number 0.85. Otherwise, have it be this random number. So my lengths will not get any shorter than that. And then we're going to do the same thing to the y value. And here, I had the minimum as 0.16. So if this random number is less than or equal to 0.16, then have it be 0.16, otherwise have it be this random number. And that's going to lengthen out a lot of those things. So that kind of gives, there's still a wide range of sizes. It just doesn't let them go any smaller or bigger than a particular thing. And then finally, we have the rotation. And I don't want them rotating all over the place. I want it to be more or less horizontal. But this we can do straight up in the random number itself. Because it doesn't have to be between 0 and 1. It can be a random number between, for example, 0 and 0.03, which is the number that I chose. And we'll set our rotation. And let's get another sequence node. So it will rotate, but it's going to rotate ever so slightly. So here we have it, and that is going to provide us the graininess that we're going to want to turn the rest of this stuff into a more wood-like material. Now, what I want to do is kind of set up two layers of graininess. There's going to be a rougher area and a finer area. So I'm going to get another warp node, and I'm going to take this, and I'm going to warp it by this. And it doesn't need to be by a lot, but this is going to be quite rough. This is the rough stuff. And then to make the finer grain one, we can, well, I'm just going to copy what I have. It's just a series of links of laying it on top of each other. So we're going to make a mask first. So this is going to be the mask for applying the finer grains. We're going to adjust all of this once we actually start looking at it in the renderer. Now to do the lighter stuff, I'm going to get an invert grayscale, and I'm going to apply it to that map right here. I'm just going to put this in here. I'm kind of getting off my notes a little bit. I'm going to squish them down. Right now they're exactly the same, but I want them, they're exactly the same as the rough ones here, but I want them smoother. So the quick way of doing that, I'm going to hold down the control key just so it works from the middle, and I'm going to stretch them out essentially is what I'm doing. And they're turning into it's a much finer grain now, but it's kind of following along, the original plan here. And now we'll get a levels node. And I'm going to get a uniform color, turn it into a grayscale white. And then we're going to get a blend node and use this as our background. This is our mask. And then we're going to multiply the results. So we're getting this much finer grain. And it's appearing in the lighter areas, at least mostly. That's the part we're going to adjust once we start looking at it. I don't think we even need to multiply this. This would just work just as well with a copy. Yeah, it doesn't make any difference. What we do need to multiply is this, because now we're going to actually lay it on top of what we have here. So we're getting finer grain stuff, heavier grain stuff. I'm not entirely sure I'm happy with this mask. Anyway, we'll see. You can't really tell until you start looking at it. I am going to need an inverse of this, though. So this is the basic untested grains that we've got. Let's try to hook this up to some sort of color. I'm going to get two gradient maps. I'm going to do one sort of for the lighter areas, one for the darker areas. I found that it came out better rather than trying to have it all on one. So we'll have the lighter browns and the darker browns. So I want that for my light color. Let's have that be the dark color. No, I'm going to have that be the light color. And then the dark color, we're going to start with that darker brown. I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to come into my gradient editor, and then I'm going to go even darker here. Maybe grayer. We're gonna put more colors in here later. I just want to kind of get the basics done. And let's see what that looks like. It's hard to tell right now. Let's put that in there now, because all we're seeing is like the darkest versions of this, and it's not giving us really accurate colors. But I really want to look. I really want to look at it first before we do anything else to it. Yeah, that's going to be all wrong, but it'll help us see it. Because right now I want to work on the color before I do anything else, because we're going to be using the same maps that we're going to be using for the other stuff. Yeah, that's, I mean, like the graininess, it's all wrong, so we're going to have to work on that. But let's get the colors set up. I think I actually want to invert that. Yeah. And then we can do this. I want it to be more or less the same, but a little bit different, because they're all part of the same piece of wood, you know, but they've got variations. I think this one I'm going to do the other way around. Okay, we'll worry about that next. Okay, let's take a look at this. Okay, now I want to worry about the graininess. So currently, oh, we're going to need at least one more of these. I want to have my underlying grains be this one, because this I'm using more for mask and grain making purposes rather than having it be my actual normal. We'll switch that out first. Now we're going to apply the grainy areas according to where we want them. We want the rougher grains in the darker areas, and then the finer grains in the lighter areas. And that's where this comes in, because these two are essentially using as masks. We're not using them directly. So my lighter areas on top here, I'm going to create a blend for my rougher grains, which will be, now we have to decide which ones those are going to be. I think those are going to be those. So it's confining it to the darker the rougher areas. And then we can kind of do the same thing for the lighter areas using this one. Oh, you know, I just realized we're having them go in the opposite direction. We forgot to switch them around. So this I want to invert. I was wondering why it wasn't looking right. Yeah, now they're going in. And whatever else it is. But, oh, we've already got some stuff inverted here, so let's take a look. This is our finer one. It's already been inverted, so we can go ahead and use this one. I'm going to give it its own levels node so we can adjust it directly. Just maybe like that. It's very shiny. Yeah, I think that's good enough for now anyway. Let's work on these colors a little bit. This is my lighter color. I'm just going to start flipping these around, see what happens. Just go lighter with the whole thing. That's pretty ugly. I think I am going to invert this mask here. I don't like the way this looks. I mean, it's the color, so it doesn't matter which direction we have it go, because it's really a question of the gradient map. I think what I don't like about it is that it's very chunky. I want it finer, so I'm going to get it finer, I'm having less grayscale difference between my elements in here. Yeah, that's better. Because, you know, it's a slight difference. It's not that big a difference. And then we can do something about this. Maybe bring the whole thing up a little bit lighter. I'm just going to globally deal with it now. I like those blacks in here. Well, it's probably good enough for government work. I'm not entirely happy with it. But I'm not entirely sure why I'm not happy with it. So I'm just going to keep moving on. That's exactly the same thing. So I'm going to just do that. Let's take a look at our roughness. Actually, no, before we do anything else, I want to clean this up. Let's make some frames. Okay, let's take care of our height quickly. I'm going to get a normal to height, HQ. Actually, let's see what that, we probably don't need a high quality. That'll do. Let's get the lower one. Not quite as expensive. We can probably even bring it down a bit, and I'm going to get a levels node, and we'll make sure that that's relative to parent. Just make sure my height sit in here. Yep, okay. I do want this relatively flat. I mean, it's not, you know, it's a piece of wood, but it'll help with the normals. And what it'll also do is give us a base for our roughness. I'm off my notes here, so I'm trying to figure out a way of getting this roughness done, which is going to have to be different than I originally did it. Okay, so now what we need to do is create our roughness map. And we're going to base it off of these normals. We're going to use the same mask, so I'm going to get a blend node, and we're going to use this original grain as our mask. And then we're going to apply the grains on top of them. And we're going to do it in the same way that we had the normals. So first we're going to do the big rough ones. And let's put that in there, see what it looks like. And let's flip that around. Let's get that invert grayscale in there. I'm not liking the way this is looking. Let's just check to make sure that we got that right. It's just very confusing. So let's just start with getting our base roughness right before we add in any of our grains. All right, so let's add in our scratches now. And we're gonna use a light and blend. And you can see how it's starting, you know, those scratches are now like the lightest thing in there, which will mean that they're the roughest. And we're going to do the same thing again for the finer scratches. You know what? We're going to use a light and blend, so I actually got that exactly backwards. Let's flip that around because we want our scratches lighter. And we're going to use a light and blend. I'm not entirely happy with my big scratches there. So let's come into our FX map and take a look at our iterations. Yeah, I like that better as far as all the, you know, the way they're placed out, but obviously it's affected everything else. So we're going to have to go back and adjust everything now. We can start by lowering down the intensity of our normals. And we're going to lower down our warp. And I think I want to adjust this mask a little bit. I want it more even. And let's take a look at these masks also. I think I want more gradient on it. Let's get those a bit smoother. And we can smooth them out a bit here too. And maybe lower down the height depth. Just going to type in 0.01. So let's adjust that mask a bit more. And I think the colors are also a problem. Let's smooth those out. I want it more subtle. And then I think we need to also take a look at our roughness. That's better. Still something bothering me about it though. Let's maybe make the height a little bit more contrasty. Maybe make the normals, maybe bring that up a little bit. I think the thing that's bothering me is the actual gradient itself, the rings. I think it needs more in here. So I'm just going to add more bands. I'm going to copy the black. And we'll put a couple more rings in here. Now, I'm going to put more points in here, but I'm not going to change their colors. I'm going to let them go down that gradient. So the color will stay the same, but I'm going to continue to put in those dark rings. So instead of being pure black and white, we're doing it along the gradient with those grays, but it's adding in rings while at the same time keeping the color gradient. I think we're on the right track. I like the way this looks a lot better. I think I want to add more. Yeah, let's maybe put some more in through the middle here. But you know what? Let's take a look and see how this looks with our changeable rings, because we're only seeing one version here, and you know, it's probably a good idea to check. We haven't checked in a while to see how this is going to look when we switch them out. Yeah, it's working. You know what? Let's make the maximum 6 and change that to true so people don't go beyond what we've put in there. I think I want to make more rings. I think I want to make more rings in through there. So let's go back into our gradient. I think it's this one here. Yeah. So I'm going to add some more, and again, I'm sticking to that gradient in there. So I'm going to copy a black, and then we'll just go ahead and start pasting those rings in there. And maybe down here as well. Oh yeah, that's much better. I like that much better. Let's make sure it works with all the other configurations. Yeah, I'm digging it. That seems to work. Cool. All right, let's make a frame. And the one thing we have left to do now is our ambient occlusion. So we'll type in ambient occlusion into our browser, and we'll attach it straight up to our height. And I think it's looking a little gray. Let's put a levels node in there. It's metallic. We forgot to change the actual rendering information to metallic. So even though we changed it in the designation, we need to change it in the 3D view. So I'm going to hit view in 3D view, and now I can assign ambient occlusion to it. Yeah, it's still metallic. You know what? Because I think it's doing both at the same time. So let's just do view all outputs in 3D view, and that's going to take care of it for us. Okay, so let's see what it looks like now. I just want to get rid of some of that gray. And then let's come into our actual ambient occlusion node and set that up. So we can actually bring the height depth down quite a bit. It's only a piece of wood. It's not that high. And let's make sure we get the GPU optimization to true. That's looking much better. I'm actually pretty happy with that. Let's make our little frame, and we'll call that AO. And I believe that's us done. So the next video, we're actually going to create an engine that's going to put chisel marks in on this guy.